Okay, well, if you have your Bibles, we're in Psalm 61 tonight. God, our protector, is what I've titled the message here. And we come to a really great section. Not that there's no great sections. They're all great. But I really have a special place in my heart for some of these Psalms in the 60s, right? And I mean like chapter 61, chapter 62, chapter 63, etc. But some of these chapters in Psalm 60s are really great chapters. As far as encouragement, when you're going through something that's really hard. Often I read from this section when people are in the hospital or going through something really quite traumatic. To the chief musician on a stringed instrument, a psalm of David. Another psalm of David. It's addressed to the chief musician. Some translate it to the choir director. The intent, we believe, was that it be used in corporate worship, to the chief musician, probably not just only for his sake, right? He's probably going to be leading the rest of the people, right? So, to the chief musician, you go into your, corner here and it's for you. Probably not. Corporate worship. It was intended to be accompanied by a stringed instrument. Isn't that interesting? On a stringed instrument. I don't know what those who hold to non-instrumental worship, I don't know what they do with psalms like that. I guess they cut out the heading, right? We don't believe in the heading here. I mean, it's just like, what do you do with this? You have to throw out a lot of the psalms. It's like musical instruments, they're not real spiritual, so let's get rid of them. It's like, what do you do with the psalms? I mean, it really builds to a climax, too, with Psalm 150. I mean, wow. I never could understand that mentality. This was the songbook of God's people, the Psalms, and so it tells us a lot about worship. We're not sure what occasion was involved as far as the writing of this psalm, but as is so often the case, David was desperate. It was a desperate situation, and he urgently comes to God, looking to him to come to his aid. Since David speaks of being, we will see, at the end of the earth, it is surmised that he was on the run out of his normal habitat of being in Jerusalem, close to the tabernacle. Some think that the dire situation, because of the language here, may have been when he was on the run from his son Absalom, as he was forced out. But we don't know that for sure. That's a guess. A lot of the commentaries kind of talk about that, but we don't know that for sure. You note the outline, God our protector, and then verses 1 and 2, crying out to God when overwhelmed. Verses 3 and 4, present trust based on God's past faithfulness. And verses 5 through 7, answered prayer. And verse 8, praising God forever. Well, let's get into it. Verse 1, hear my cry, O God, attend to my prayer. Right out of the gate, David desperately appeals to God. And before asking anything specifically, he first asks for God to hear his cry and to attend to his prayer. Isn't that kind of an interesting prayer? God, hear my prayer. You pray that way? I really don't pray that way. I'm assuming God's hearing my prayer, right? But note, I think really what David isn't wondering whether God hears him or not. I don't think that's the real issue. I think he's really asking God to hear in the sense of answering, hearing in the sense of responding. We might interpret this, answer my prayer, respond to my prayer. I think that's really what he is saying when he says this. But note, I don't think David at the same time was presuming upon God that he would respond in a certain way. Rather, I think he comes in the spirit of asking. Name it and claim it theology almost seems to reverse who is really in charge, like we can in any way force God's hand. We can ask. You have not because you ask not. We ask, but, nobody forces God's hand. In biblical praying, we come asking, we come dependent, we come humbly looking to God. I think that's the spirit of David's prayer. And notice he says here, verse 2, from the end of the earth I will cry to you. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. This is a great verse for when you're overwhelmed, to the point where you don't feel you can take it anymore. That's David. The end of the earth, I cry to you. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. This verse would suggest again that very possibly, David is on the run away from his home and all that would make him feel comfortable. He's completely out of his element. Again, this is why some think the occasion may have been when he was on the run from Absalom in Absalom's hostile takeover attempt. But again, we don't know that. David was evidently far from the sanctuary, the tabernacle, as we will see, the designated place of worship. And I think it felt to him like he was at the end of the earth, the end of it all, the end of human resources, far from the place of worship, far from the place where he felt strength in the presence of God there. And yet, even here at the end of the earth, at the end of his strength, as it were, at the end of his human resources, even there, David knew he could cry out to God. Where do you go when you get to the end of your rope? Well, you go to God. That's what David is saying here. Warren Wiersbe writes, he was obviously not at the end of the earth, but he felt that way, for he was away from home and away from the sanctuary of God. I think that probably is the key idea here. When you come to the end of everything, you can still cry out to God. Even there, God will meet you. That old song, "Where Could I Go But to the Lord," is very fitting. David says, when my heart is overwhelmed. The word overwhelmed is also translated as faint or without strength. Sometimes you get to where you're so beaten down, I don't have any more strength. I'm just overwhelmed. That's where David was. It's sometimes used to describe being exhausted or being spent. In this condition of being overwhelmed, we need help, right? That's what David is recognizing. God, I need your help in this condition. And so he prayed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. As David was running for his life, possibly, we don't know what the dire situation was, but very possibly, he would often find safety and security in rock caves in the wilderness. But here he is looking for something more, something higher than he can find by himself. He needs help to get to that high place. The rock pictures something that is secure, steady, safe, a safe place. And he asked God to put him in that position, put me in a safe place, in a secure place. He realizes he will not find this within himself. He needs a rock higher than himself. And ultimately, this rock is the Lord himself. I think what David is really praying for is that God will lead him into the security that is found in God himself. This is clear because in the context, David immediately goes on to say in verse 3 that God himself is his shelter and his strong tower. Now, in the Bible, the Lord himself is often called a rock, or the rock. And it's interesting, this metaphor of rock is never used of any mere man in the Bible, including, I believe, the reference in Matthew 16:18, where it's referring either to Christ. I don't think it's referring to Peter. It's referring either to Christ or, as I prefer, to the rock truth that Peter has just confessed. I believe the rock Christ is going to build his church on is the rock confession, which is, Christ, who Jesus Christ is, as the Christ, the Son of the living God. Note a couple of references here in the Old Testament as far as God being our rock. Deuteronomy 32:31, for their rock is not like our rock. And he's saying, the false gods, their supposed rock is really not a rock. It's not like our rock, which is a real rock. Even our enemies themselves being judges. And then 2 Samuel 22:32, for who is God except the Lord? And who is a rock except our God? Our God is a rock. He's a secure, safe place. You know that old song, Rock of Ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee. That's a great line. David Guzik says, David needed God to lead him to that rock. David was unable to get to the firm-footed place above his crisis on his own. Assuming David wrote this as king, humanly speaking, he had reached the top of the ladder. He still realized that wasn't enough and needed something higher than himself. So what a great verse this is. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. And then he says, verse 3, for you have been a shelter for me, a strong tower from the enemy. David here now shifts gears a little bit. He needs present help, but he's remembering what God has been to him in the past. David here speaks in past tense. He remembers how God in the past has been a shelter or a refuge for him. He's been a refuge for him in times of danger. God has provided a hiding place, a place of safety. But behind this place of safety, David realizes it's really God himself who has been the shelter. Now, a strong tower in Bible times was a central place in ancient cities where people could run to when facing danger, and therein find safety and security. So David says, you've been a strong tower from the enemy. God himself has been this strong tower, providing protection against the enemy. A great memory verse, you know this maybe you don't, but Proverbs 18:10, the name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. This is our safe place. We run to the Lord. Well, as David looked back, and that's the past tense here, he's looking back, he recognized that God has not failed him. In every crisis, God has brought him through. God has provided. God himself has been his shelter, his protection, his high tower. You know, I think it's good to think through the many things God has brought us through. You've been through, if you've lived a little life, you've been through a few things, right? You've been through some hard times. You've been through some crisis. Has God brought you through? I mean, it's good sometimes when you're in the middle of a crisis to think, well, yeah, it's brought me to this point. Do you think he can take you further? Well, I'm pretty sure if he's brought you this far, he can take you as far as he wants to take you. And so it's good to kind of think through that lens. Yes, he used this and that, and he worked in this way and that way, but behind it all, God is the source. He himself is our shelter and our strong tower. It is good to remind ourselves of this, especially in the midst of a crisis, because in the midst of a crisis, that gets our focus. Our attention sometimes is there, and it's easy to kind of lose focus on, oh, God's still in charge here. Well, God is still God, and how he has worked in the past, he can work in the present. This strengthens our faith as we go forward. Verse 4. I will abide in your tabernacle forever. I will trust in the shelter of your wings, Selah. Now, the question is this an expression of desire or a statement of faith? As it's stated in the New King James, it almost sounds like a statement of faith. I will abide in your tabernacle forever. But the New American Standard translates this, let me dwell in thy tent forever. Certainly this was David's desire. He wanted to be close to God. Presently he felt like he was at the ends of the earth, far removed from God's intimate presence. But his desire was to dwell in God's tabernacle forever, which is to say in God's intimate presence. The word tabernacle simply means tent. He wants to live in God's tent. Isn't that a neat figure? He wants to live in God's tent forever. Now, during the time of David, the original tabernacle of the Lord made by Moses back in the Old Testament, at that time it was initially located at Gibeon, as seen in 1 Chronicles 16 and 21. However, in 2 Samuel 6, 17, and also 1 Chronicles 16, 1, it is said that David moved the ark into the tabernacle in Jerusalem that David had erected. So this was really a precursor to the temple that Solomon, his son, would build after his death. This tabernacle represented God's special residing place in the Old Testament. This is where the people came to worship intimately with God. And David kind of set up elaborate singers and all kinds of things related to the worship, related to the tabernacle there. And this is where they would experience his special presence as they came to worship. I think David's missing that at this point as he's been pushed out. The tabernacle, the tent of God, is pictured as his special place of residing. Although he is everywhere, for sure, it was a picture of God's home in that sense. Thus, the tent of God was a special place of refuge where protection and hospitality were extended to the special guest, as it were. And David says, I want to be there. That's where I want to be. That's where he longs to be, in that position forever. Well, it is no wonder that God called David a man after his own heart. I mean, David wanted to be close to God forever. He truly had a heart for God. He loved God. He wanted to be close and near in fellowship with him forever. Now, notice he goes on to say there, I will trust in the shelter of your wings, Selah. Now, God doesn't actually have wings. David here speaks metaphorically of the place of refuge that is found in close relationship with God. It's a beautiful picture, really. It's a beautiful metaphor. This, too, pictures a place of security and protection found in close relationship with God. David Guzik again says, wings as the near and protected place that a mother bird gives to her offspring, protecting her chicks under the shelter of her wings. That's kind of the picture, close to the heart of God. However, there is another idea here, and some of the commentators bring this out. Since David has just mentioned the tabernacle of God, some suggest that what is in his mind here is an allusion to the wings of the cherubim, which overshadowed the mercy seat in the Holy of Holies. And some think maybe that's what's in David's mind. Because if you think about this, that would mean that David is desiring the closest of intimate relationship that could be pictured in terms of an Old Testament context here. Because when you think about what we were looking at there in the Holy of Holies, the cherubim over the ark, and there the glory of God was. And of course, it was even seen up above where the tabernacle was. But this was really the intimate presence of the glory of God. So if he's thinking about, the wings in that sense, well, that would make sense as far as very intimate with God, and that's where he wants to be. Well, building on the rock that is higher than I, David uses image after image to illustrate what he is trying to say. In verses 3 and 4, he uses 4 different metaphors to make his point. So after talking about the rock that is higher than I, we have these metaphors. Verse 3, shelter. Verse 3, strong tower. Verse 4, tabernacle. And verse 4, your wings. And then David says, Selah, Selah. This reflects a pause, sort of like stop and meditate on this. How wonderful to reflect on the character of God and who he is to us. This is medicine for the soul when we are overwhelmed and all strength is gone. Reflecting on who God is to David and what he has done for him has in effect renewed David's mind. He now speaks in a different tone. There's kind of a turning point here. And now the tone is one of great confidence and assurance. Notice what he says, verse 5. For you, O God, have heard my vows. How did he start out the psalm? Verse 1, hear my cry. Verse 5, for you, O God, have heard my vows. You have given me the heritage of those who fear your name. Now, when he talks about vows here, it is most likely referring to vows that were made during this time of intense pressure. And he is saying he would fulfill them. You have heard my vows, and he'll go on to talk about how he's going to fulfill these vows. But we really think these vows probably were the idea of that he is committing himself to live entirely for God. We'll talk more about this in a moment, but the spirit of it seems to be something like this. I have vowed to be wholly yours and to serve you with all my heart. God, you have responded to my wholehearted commitment and have given me the heritage that is given to those who fear your name. So it's like, you've heard my vows, and God, you have given to me the heritage, the inheritance of those who fear your name. So it's like God has responded to these vows in this way. Heritage is the idea of inheritance. And it is the blessings and the benefits that God has given to his people. In the Old Testament, it often signified the promised land. This was their inheritance. This was their heritage. Often associated with the blessings, too, that God promised to his people. Now notice he says, you have given me the heritage of those who fear your name. The idea of fearing God's name is to reverence him for who he is. It is to hold the person of God in awe and wonder, which is characteristic of being a true worshiper of God. In the Bible, fear of God is often characteristic having a true relationship with God, a saving faith relationship with God. Note just a couple examples, one from the Old Testament here, where it says in Psalm 2, serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Connect that with what he says there in verse 12. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and you perish in the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all those who put their trust in him. Serve the Lord with fear. Blessed are those who put their trust in him. This is kind of a reverential fear, a reverential awe for God that is indicative of the right kind of faith. How about in the New Testament? In Acts chapter 10, Peter says, but in every nation whoever fears him and works righteousness is accepted by him. Now we know Peter didn't believe in a work salvation. That's not what he's saying. I think what he is saying is what's indicative of a right kind of faith is it has a reverence for God and it works its way out in your life. Notice he goes on to say in that same context in verse 43, to him all the prophets witness that through his name whoever believes in him will receive remission of sins. So who's forgiven? Well, the one who believes. What kind of belief are we talking about? Well, in every nation whoever fears him and works righteousness. It is a life-changing kind of faith that reverences God and then works its way out in your life. Well, the nature of a true saving faith is one that fears or reverences God for who he is. It is they who share in the inheritance of the Lord, what God has for those who truly know him. Well, in David's case, speaking very personally, he may have had in mind his special God-given role to rule over the nation. This was kind of his inheritance that God had granted to him. This is a great line, a great statement here by David in Psalm 16:6. The lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. Yes, I have a good inheritance. I think he's talking about what God has given to him, what God has blessed him with as the king. Everything that God has given to him in that way. By way of application, the Bible does speak in terms of New Testament believers who fear and reverence God. We also have a promised inheritance. In the book of Colossians, for example, giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in light. We're going to share in what God has for his people. This is our inheritance. This is what God is going to give to us. We share in that. And then in chapter 3:24, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. For you serve the Lord Christ. We have an inheritance. We have what God is going to give us in eternity. Well, verse 6 continues. You will prolong the king's life, his years as many generations. Now, the broader thought of verses 6 and 7 ties, we believe, into the Davidic covenant that God made with David in 2 Samuel chapter 7. In essence, prophetically, David seems to be tying himself to the great covenant promises, and rightfully so, that are ultimately to be fulfilled in the greater David, in the Messiah. So in the broad sense, the longevity of David's dynasty will go for many generations. Notice, you will prolong the king's life, his years as many generations. How many generations did David live? Well, let's try one, right? But this, you will prolong the king's life, his years as many generations? Yes, God would prolong David's life by saving him from the adversary. But then in terms of the promised dynasty, David in effect would live vicariously through the promised dynasty of descendants, culminating in the Messiah who will live and reign forever. Well, it's thought that many generations here really is a poetical way of saying forever, which is paralleled by forever in verse 7, verse 8. Notice what God promised David. I mean, just imagine if God is promising you this, as he was to David. 2 Samuel 7:16, and your house and your kingdom shall be established forever before you. Your throne shall be established forever. David, this is yours. Your house, your kingdom, your throne, forever. Well, how's that possible? I mean, David himself personally, of course, in the resurrection, he's going to live forever. That's true. But really, we know this is ultimately fulfilled in the greater David, in the Messiah. So understood in this sense, indeed, King David's life would be prolonged and his years of rule extended through many generations in fulfillment of the Davidic covenant. So David confidently expected God's blessing upon his reign. It was not because he thought so highly of himself. It was because he thought so highly of the God who keeps his promises. Verse 7, he shall abide before God forever. Oh, prepare mercy and truth, which may preserve him. Legacy Standard Bible translates this in this way. Psalm 61:7. He will sit enthroned before God forever. In the position of king, he will abide before God forever. Well, how can that be? Well, I believe it is ultimately fulfilled in the person of the greater David again, who is the son of David, the Messiah. Notice it talks about here mercy. Oh, prepare mercy and truth, which may preserve him. This word mercy here is that rich Hebrew word hesed. It's a very rich word, being a combination of goodness and faithfulness. It's often translated as loyal love. It expressed God's faithful covenant-keeping love. So it expresses absolute loyalty and faithfulness. The character of God's loyal love ensures that what God has promised to David will be fulfilled. And then he says, truth. Oh, prepare mercy and truth, which may preserve him. Truth, again, is the idea of God's faithfulness. God's loyal covenant love and faithfulness will preserve, will guard him, and thus ensure this will be a definite reality. By the way, the ancient Jewish Targum, which is an ancient commentary on the Hebrew Scriptures, says at Psalm 61, verses 6 and 7, it says this is really talking about the Messiah. In this sense, it could be viewed as a messianic psalm. Many commentators do think that really what's in view in verses 6 and 7 ultimately is fulfilled in the Messiah. And you can see the correspondence as you work through it. The Messiah, his life in the resurrection was prolonged endlessly. His years will not come to an end. His throne is forever and ever. God will keep him in all of his ways. So all the things that David is saying here that certainly have application to him in a greater way are fulfilled in the Messiah. So he rounds out this particular psalm, verse 8. So I will sing praise to your name forever, that I may daily perform my vows. David began the psalm by desperately crying out to God, but then as he focused on God and how God has been so good and faithful to him, he ends up with an affirmation to praise God forever and daily live out his vows of commitment. Evidently, his vows involve serving God every day for the rest of his life, or something along those lines. William MacDonald writes, he will not be like those who make extravagant vows when the pressure is on, then quickly forget them when the crisis is past. He will not be one who leaps in prayer but limps in praise. I kind of like that. He will not be one who leaps in prayer but limps in praise. Well, as David reflected on the character of God, he thought of the past and how God has been faithful. And then he focused on what God has promised him regarding the future, especially in relationship to the Davidic covenant, which promised David an eternal house, kingdom, and throne. This focusing on the name, the character of God, caused him to commit to praising God forever and daily living out his commitment to him as a day in and day out way of life. By the way, there's a lot of forever in David's focus here. Just by way of review, verse 4, I will abide in your tabernacle forever. He shall abide before God forever. So I will sing praise to your name forever. If you're overwhelmed by what is going on in the present, focus on the character of God with an eternal perspective. You know, I'm glad everything here is temporary. I'm glad you can say whatever's going on, this too shall pass. We are looking to a forever better reality. Cry out to God. That's what David did. Look to him for protection. We're going to live with God forever. We're going to live in his tabernacle, in his tent. We're going to live in his presence forever. Therefore, in view of an eternal perspective, let us resolve with David to praise his name forever. For the very best is yet to be, and it will be forever. I don't know who wrote this. After the storm that sweeps the sea, after the drifting to the lee, after the rocks and sands are past, cometh the joy of home at last. After the long and toilsome day, after the sun's fierce burning ray, after the toiler homeward goes, cometh the night and sweet repose. After the winter long and drear, after the snow clouds disappear, after the wind's sweet odors bring, cometh the ever welcome spring. After the work with self is done, after all sin is overcome, after the race of life is run, cometh the Master's sweet, well done. After all that here we see, what will there be? Eternity. Indeed, live in light of eternity. Life here is overwhelming, but God is bigger than life. I don't care what we're going through, God is always the answer. Live with a God-centered focus. Live with an eternal perspective. Indeed, live in light of eternity. Let's stand and have our closing song, and I'll close this in a word of prayer.